Alright, what is up, my dudes? Here we are with the long-awaited tier list update. It has been, what, like 6 months since the last tier list, but we finally have a relevant patch. Things have finally changed. It feels good, man. Feels good to have a significant patch where things have actually made a real difference. Alright, before we start, let's again talk about the definitions in case people have forgotten. We've got S tier is God tier units, probably overpowered in this metagame. A tier is very strong. This is units that are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily like need a nerf, but they're like borderline, or they're like very, very core parts of all of the top decks. They're just like the best units in the game right now. B is good units, solid, strong units. These are probably balanced, I'd say. Like, if the game was fully balanced, everything would be B tier. C tier is playable, but really not recommended. So this is stuff that, like, if you see it occasionally, you're not that surprised. But it's very rarely going to be a constituent part of the high tier decks. And then D tier is like, this is probably just something you shouldn't be touching. Like, you probably shouldn't even consider it. Alright. Let us start with the commanders, as always. Here is the December commanders. And here are our July commanders. So obviously there's a few changes here, not too much. Liang and Jade still hanging out in the dumpster. Kane is C tier. I think I had Kane at B tier previously. This one I'm not sure about. I think that I'm going to talk about this a lot throughout this video, but the economy change was a big deal. And Kane has suffered from the economy change because Kane costs a lot of money. It's harder to save up for a Kane now. Like, you actually have to actively choose to save for a Kane instead of just having enough money to make a Kane tower. And that is a big deal. On the other hand, there's more tanks around, which Kane is really good against. But I think the economy hit is a bigger deal than there being tanks around. So Kane is back in C tier, sadly. Solomon also hanging out in C tier. Same reason. It's expensive. Like, Tempo Solomon is expensive. You can't really afford to do it much. And tech is a lot worse than it was. Like, tech, well, again, we'll talk about this later. Mostly the economy changes. Tech suffered a lot. And Solomon's best thing Solomon does is kills tech units. And tech is kind of bad now. So, Solomon in C tier. Strong Arm also received a nerf. I personally think it was an unnecessary nerf, pushing Strong Arm to B. As a result of this, Jackson moves to A as the now de facto best GDI commander, because he is just simply the de facto, in air quotes, best GDI commander. He has to be a higher tier than Strong Arm, really, because he is the best. He's better than McNeil. He's better than Strong Arm, so he's A tier. Seth and Oksana still hanging out in A, both just great choices, great Nod commanders. Alright, let's move on to Nod. Here is the old Nod. Here is July Nod. As you can see, a ton of changes here. So the first thing I've done, I've put bikes in S tier. I'm not sure about this one. They're in S tier because the economy change makes 40 cost units harder to spam, which makes pitbulls harder to spam, which means that bike spam can overcome pitbull spam, whereas before you would just get shreked by pitbulls. Now you can kind of spam a load of bikes and catch back up. So yeah, they're not that affected by the economy changes. So other units are more affected than bikes are. So bikes have been moved to S tier, which I think it's fair, but it's close. They could just be A tier, but they're just so ubiquitous. They're in like every deck. They're super strong. I don't know. It's tough. I'm not 100% convinced on them being S tier here, so this one could definitely change next time I do a tier list. Let's talk about A tier. So everything that is in A tier was already in A tier. So nothing new has joined A tier. This is also likely to change. As the meta develops, as I get a better sense of really what is the best thing to do, stuff from B tier will creep into A tier, because that's kind of how it works. Like, as the meta settles down and we start seeing the same stuff over and over and over, that stuff that is in B tier now but becomes more popular will move to A tier. Because that's kind of the difference between B tier and A tier, is like how popular it is, like how good it is in the current metagame. But everything in A tier is the same. Some stuff has dropped from A tier, which we will talk about. But yeah, nothing has climbed into A tier. And as you can see, there's a lot of B tier at the moment, which I think means that we have a pretty balanced game. And I do genuinely believe the game is pretty balanced right now. And as I said at the start, if everything is in B tier, that's probably like perfect balance effectively. So let's talk about a couple of units that could potentially be moving to A tier. Mutants and Giga are both way more popular. Mutant Chuggy was already popular, but now it's even more popular. And Giga Cannon has made a massive comeback. Like, Giga Cannon was kind of in the dumpster thanks to Shade. It's made a massive comeback. It's seeing a lot more Giga Cannon on ladder. This one it's kind of a broken unit. If you don't have a good answer to Giga, you just get run over by it. And if the map is a good Giga map, it's really hard to beat. It's kind of an obnoxious unit. Giga Cannon is in a weird space where it's in B, but it could legitimately be S. But yeah, Giga Cannon is a strong contender for moving to A next tier list. Mutant Marauder is also, because Mutant Chuggy is everywhere, but I do believe the Chuggy is the stronger part of that combo by a lot. So that's why Chuggy is currently the one in A tier. What else have we got changes on? Flame Tank is still in B. This is potentially going down because tech units are so bad right now, like I've been talking about. They just come out too late. But I think of all the tech units, Flame Tank is still one of the most obnoxious. So I've left it in B, but I'm not sure about this. This could definitely be moving to C. Catship has dropped from S to B, as has Shade. Both of these units receive pretty significant nerfs. Yeah, Catship is just, I barely ever see it. I don't even know B is the right place. When I've played it, I have been surprised at how not terrible it is. I've been like, oh, this actually isn't horrible, it's alright. So that's why I've left it in B tier. But I basically never see them anymore. Like, everyone else, I think there's like the shock of it going from being so strong to being fine. A lot of people are like underestimating the unit now because they're just like, oh my god, it's so much worse than it was. And they're not really trying it. So I'm not seeing them at all, but I do actually think the unit is still okay. Buggy's hanging out in B. I think Buggy's pretty good right now. Buggy could also potentially go A. I actually like Buggy Scorp decks a lot right now. And that's the only time you take bikes out of your deck. The only time you ever take bikes out of your deck is when you're replacing them with Buggy. But I do think Buggy is potentially viable as a substitute. That's why it's in B. Could maybe be A. Fanatics got another nerf. They've gone down to B tier. I think that Fanatics are just, like, not the best infantry now. Like, for ages, Fanatics were just the best infantry choice. Like, you went Militants or Fanatics, and that was it. Like, those were the options. But now I think I'm seeing Chems and Flamers are both now viable alternatives. So this is one of the reasons that Flames were in D for so long as well. Is because there was no reason to play Flames when you could just play Chem Buggy or Militant or Fanatic. Especially Fanatic. Like, you want a slightly more expensive anti-infantry, you would just always play Fanatic instead of Flamer. So that's why Flame was in D, because there was just never a reason to play it over Fanatic. I don't think that's true anymore. I think Fanatic is a lot worse. It is still a good unit, but it's a lot worse than it was. I think Flamer is like a viable alternative now, which is why Flamer and Chem are both in B as well. I think these are all of these units are viable choices. You can play any of them as your, like, tier 2 anti-infantry, and they're all pretty decent. So yeah, I think all of them are viable choices, and I think they're all good right now. The day has finally come when Shocks and Flames are playable. We've actually reached that stage. The Catship nerf obviously is also a huge part of that. Catship being everywhere made Flames and Shocks absolutely terrible because it killed them super easily. And also it was just the same role. So you wouldn't want to play Flames with your Catship. And you'd always want to play Catship because it was insane. So you'd never play Flames. And the same is true with Shocks. Like, you would always play something else. You'd play Razorback, or you'd play Drone Storm, or you'd play APC last meta. There's just no reason for Shocks. But that's not true anymore. I think Flames and Shocks, both solid options now. The other things on the list are just tech units going down. So Rockworm's gone from B to C. Could even be D. Again, like, I think Basilisk could also be D, but it counts as other tech. So if you're playing against tech a lot, it's still got a place. And Centurion and Avatar are both in D now. These things just come out so late. Like, all tech comes out so late that it's just kind of terrible. If you just charge the missile, tech won't kill you. You'll just win the game. So yeah, it's back like it was in the beta where tech was just unplayable because it came out too late. That is obviously an issue for the balance of the game, but I believe this is a healthier solution than having tech that comes out and just wins the game and makes all other units irrelevant. I think that was awful. So I do think whilst this is kind of bad, it's not as bad as it was when tech was good. So what we need to do is get to a point where tech is okay, but not overwhelmingly powerful, and then also comes out in a reasonable time frame, which means we need to adjust all of the stats and cost of every single tech unit, basically. And that's a like mammoth task. So yeah, tech units at the moment are just kind of in the dumpster. Flame Tank I've left in B because it's so strong. But yeah, I think maybe that's wrong. I think maybe it should be C. Anyway, that's Nod. Let's move on to GDI. Here is the previous GDI, and here is new GDI. So as you can see, quite a lot of changes here as well. Pitbull still in S. A tier units, I know a lot of people may have noticed this. GDI doesn't have that many good units right now. Like, GDI is kind of struggling. I think a lot of people are feeling this way. Like, Nod just feels way stronger. Nod has a lot of, like, good options. I think that if we were comparing all of the units on one big tier list, you'd have a lot more Nod units above GDI units. But the GDI units are ranked in comparison to other GDI units. So, like, even though, like, you know, I've got MLRS in B tier and Giga in B tier, I think the Giga is a better unit. So if this was one combined tier list with all of the units in the same place, Giga would be above MLRS. But because they only get compared to units in the same faction, because you can't choose to play other units, like if you're playing GDI, you have to play GDI units, so they get compared to each other. Yeah, so that's why these things are in the same tier as the Nod units, even though Nod units are kind of better. Like, Mutant and Giga would both be A tier if they were GDI units. Like, pretty easily, I think, they'd be A tier if they were GDI. But since GDI doesn't have access to those options, that's why these things are ranked the way they are. There is some room to consider maybe doing a tier list where I factor in versus other faction, and then all of GDI would, like, slump a tier, and we'd have to have, like, an F tier or something. But, like, it's not fair to put stuff that's currently in GDI C in D with the other GDI D stuff when it's better than they are, but it's worse than the Nod C tier stuff, if you get what I'm saying. Anyway, I've rambled on about this way too much. I just want to make it clear that although there is stuff in GDI B that it's worse than Nod B, that's the reason why. It's because it's comparing to its own faction. Anyway, so, Nod used to have a ton of A tier units. You could basically build a deck out of them. It was called Bite Crush APC. That was basically just a deck of A tier units, including Strong Arm, who's also now B tier. A lot of that stuff is now B tier. Like, APC is now B, Talon is now B, Jump Jet is now B. All of those things were in that deck. That deck got hit really hard by this patch, like, really hard. And nothing got buffed up enough to become A tier. Nothing is good enough to, like, replace it in A tier. So normally what happens is when you nerf stuff, whatever was the next best thing goes up to A tier because now it's the best option. But the nerfs kind of just brought the stuff back into line with the current B tier units. So now GDI is just like a wash with B tier and doesn't really have that much A tier. So that is why Nod is feeling a lot stronger than GDI right now, because Nod has way more, like, A tier units. So the one thing that has changed and gone up is the Predator tank. I think Predator tank is actually really strong right now. Like, for GDI units, compared to other, again, this is what it's all about. We've got to compare it to what else is available in the faction. And compared to other GDI units, I actually think the Predator's really strong at the moment. A large part of this is that Nod is playing a lot more War Factory decks. Like, Nod is playing Giga, Nod is playing Scorpion. Shade is a lot weaker than it was. And Nod is playing, like, Mutant Chuggy. Predator's good against all of these things. So I do think Predator is the one guy that deserves to go up. I think Predator is actually very strong right now. I like Predator a lot at the moment. But let's talk about what's in B tier, because obviously this has changed a lot. So APC, Talon, and Jump Jet, these have all been knocked down to B. They're all still playable. They're all still decent units. You still see them a lot, but they're no longer strong. You know, you don't see a Jump Jet and go, oh my god, it's insane. You don't see an APC spam and think, oh, this is nuts. Because people can't really spam APC anymore. There's not enough money and they cost too much. Like, Talon spam doesn't just stall missiles forever because they're slow. Like, it's easy to stop them once you're in control of the map. So all of these things, they're still good, but they don't feel, like, oppressive anymore. So they're no longer A, they're just down to B. And then, of course, we've got a bunch of stuff moving up. Snipers are up to B. Shocks are finally up to B. MLRS is up to B. Mohawk is up to B. So we see less Stealth Tank than we used to. Like, Stealth Tank was ubiquitous, making the Mohawk completely unplayable. That is no longer the case. There's a lot less Stealth Tank. There's still a reasonable amount of Stealth Tank, and Mohawk sucks versus it. But if there isn't a Stealth Tank, Mohawk does a pretty good job. MLRS is up because, again, we're back in a War Factory-centric meta. MLRS is great in War Factory-centric meta, and it can beat Giga one-on-one because the Giga doesn't charge up before the MLRS one-shots it. Shocks, finally up to B. I think Shocks are legit now. Like, I know I've been hating on for ages, but it was never their stats that I had a problem with. It was always the fact that it just wasn't worth playing them because there was something better. But now, you used to play APC or Razorback or Drone Swarm. I don't know, man. Like, Drone Swarm's still decent, but other than that, you haven't got a lot of options. Shocks is now a solid one. And snipers don't feel oppressive, which I was worried they would, but they just don't. Because they have such low hit points, they are reasonably easy to chip away at. If you ever break the line and get to them, they just die. So I do think Shocks have a place as a beefier sniper that's like easier to play in front lines instead of backlining. So yeah, I think Shocks and Snipers are both legit choices. Talon, you know, is a lot worse than it was, so you can't just crutch on Talon Dog Rifle like you did with the APC deck. APC's worse. They're like, yeah, so all these anti-infantry options are about on par now, I think. You can play any of these and they're legit. Yeah. All of those B tier units are solid, but none of them feel super strong. They all just feel fine. Let's talk about what's gone down. So I've put Slingshots gone down to C. We're out of the air meta, so Slingshot's just worse. Like, there just isn't as much air, and Slingshot is kind of bad. Like, it was only ever in B tier because there was so much air running around that even though it sucked, it was just good versus the meta. But now it just sucks again. I really don't like Slingshot. I think it is over nerfed, but at the same time, I think that the unit is so toxic that it belongs in the dumpster. And I know this is a personal opinion. Obviously, this is not the opinion of the devs. I don't speak for the devs or anything, but I hate the Slingshot, and I think the game is better when Slingshot is a terrible unit, because I just think it's a horrible unit to play with or against. Kind of like how I feel about Borker and MG, honestly. So yeah, Slingshot, I just think it's kind of bad, so it's in C tier. Titan is also in C tier now. Again, it's in C rather than D. With every other GDI tech unit, you'll notice every GDI tech unit is in D tier except for the Titan. The Titan is still a powerful unit, and it still comes out not like you can sometimes get a Titan. So that's why I've left it in C, but potentially it should also be in D with the rest of tech. GDI tech is just so slow to come out now, so slow to have an impact. Most of the GDI tech units have had actual statistical nerfs as well. Like Mammoth is slower, Sandstorm is lower hit points. Kodiak got a big nerf to stats at some point. I can't remember what it was exactly, but I think it got like lost some damage or hit points or something. Zone Troopers lost a bunch of infantry damage. Like, all of these GDI tech units have had stat nerfs, and then we also got hit by the economy change. So GDI tech units are just absolute trash right now. Nod tech units haven't had the stat nerfs, so some of them are still kind of playable, like Artillery and Rockworm and Flame Tank, but they were still hit by the economy nerf. And then finally, MSV is at the bottom there. I don't know about this one, actually, because I've been talking about how it's a War Factory-centric metagame again, and MSV decks tend to be, like, obviously they're War Factory decks, and they tend to be pretty oppressive when they're decent. So I might be wrong about MSV, but I've basically not seen it. Like, I've not seen it on ladder at all. I think the decks are too expensive with the economy change. Like, you lose a lot of expensive units in those decks. Slingshot is 60, MRS is 70, Shatter is 50. So I don't know if people can really afford to rebuild their fortresses anymore. So yeah, I think MSV is another horrible design. Like, I'm okay with MSV being in the dumpster. But yeah, we've got a big changes this patch. Big changes. I think we're a lot closer to balanced game than we ever have been. Like, there's a lot of viable decks. You can play a lot. I see a lot of different things. I play a lot of different things. And I don't just run into the deck and feel like I'm getting crushed. And the patch has been out for a while now. Like, and we still don't seem to have developed a best deck. There seems to be a lot of viable decks out there. So I do think we're at a pretty balanced point right now. There obviously are some things that need changes. I know a lot of people are like mad at Giga Cannon or Mutants or Chuggy, and that's fair enough. These are strong things. But I don't feel like they're actually oppressive. Like, no one is just dominating the metagame by playing these decks. So, yeah, I think we're at a pretty balanced state. And we finally reached a stage where Shocks and Flames are playable, and I'm not memeing. Like, when I say I'm not memeing about S-tier Shocks. I mean, they're still not S-tier, but they are decent now. Like, I play Shocks, I play Flames, I'm happy with them. So, yeah. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this patch as well. I think it's a really good patch. Obviously, we still need some more work to try and, like, bring the underused units back into the game. But I think we've reached a stage where we can try and do that. Like, up until now, we've been putting out fires. Every patch has been putting out fires because something was super broken. And now we're at this stage where it feels like, yeah, we can actually go, hey, let's actually talk about buffing some stuff. Let's talk about bringing some of the lesser used units back into the meta instead of just talking about fixing the stuff that is dominating. Instead of being like, let's dumpster this unit that's everywhere, we can go, hey, let's maybe talk about the units that are in the dumpster and see if we can work on them a little bit. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that tier list, and I will see you next time.